It's now my pleasure to introduce Chaplain Colonel Janet Horton, U.S. Army retired, who will speak to us on the topic of Christian Science nursing, embracing humanity. Janet, what a privilege it is to have you with us today.
Thank you, Patrice. It's a joy to have a tour of your beautiful facility and meet so many of those at Sunrise Haven I've come to love. And greetings from Florida to all you wonderful Christian Science nurses and support staff, to you volunteers and practitioners, and the prayer support team and the trustees. It's an honor to break bread with you who care about Christian Science healing as much as we all do. This last spring, during a Zoom workshop with Sunrise Haven's Christian Science nurses, their mission statement was shared with me. Sunrise Haven, inspiring, loving, and healing humanity. Healing humanity is such an expansive thought. So when Patrice asked me to speak on the subject of embracing humanity, I couldn't have been more pleased. It's one of my favorite subjects. As I studied our inspiring theme, embracing humanity, my Bible searches revealed something surprising. I had never realized that neither the word humane nor the word humanity appears in the King James Version of the Bible. Turning to the dictionary, humanity is defined as referring to mankind collectively, or the state of being benevolent or humane. It's closely related to kindness, sympathy, tenderness, and compassionate or benevolent states of thought. Let's start by listening to some of the Bible passages that shed light on how Jesus and Paul embodied this idea of embracing humanity. Matthew. Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "Send the multitude away. They need to go into the villages and buy themselves victuals." But Jesus said, "They need not depart. Give ye them to eat." And they say unto him, "We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes." He said, "Bring them hither to me." And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Acts. Paul called unto him the disciples and embraced them, and said unto them, "Ye know after what manner I have been with you at all seasons, serving the Lord with all humility of mind, and how I kept back nothing that was profitable unto you." Hebrews. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. These all, not having received the promises, were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on earth. To broaden my concept of humanity, I had to start by seeing who I truly am and take a stand for how I should be seeing my fellow human beings. In the Christian Science textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, Mary Baker Eddy encourages us by giving us a spiritual and inspiring basis to see mankind. She states, "Let worth be judged according to wisdom, and we get better views of humanity." When I was quite young, my family moved from Michigan to Oklahoma. I had no idea that on my very first day at school, I would learn more clearly what it meant to embrace humanity, my own and the humanity of people I'd never met before. My dad simply took my brother and me to our new school and dropped us off because I was the size of a second grader. I couldn't convince the principal that my younger brother and I weren't twins. Later that morning, a secretary reviewed my file and realized that what I had told her was true, so she took me to the sixth grade room. At recess, I played with another quiet young girl. I had no concept of race, nor had I ever seen persons of color before. By the second recess, the white children cornered me against a brick wall. A girl who was probably over 5 foot tall stepped out in front and demanded to know, "Are you a Yankee or are you a rebel?" Even at 11 years old, I knew who I truly was and that it had nothing to do with the state that I lived in. What I did know was that it had everything to do with the state of a person's heart. I knew from Sunday school that it included loving my neighbor, but it didn't include any man-made artificial divisions. I knew with certainty and precision who I was and whose I was. I remember saying with more authority than I'd ever spoken with before, "I'm a Christian Scientist." The children hadn't anticipated a spiritual answer. The young girl looked to the other children who just looked very puzzled. Then she simply said, "Well, okay, as long as you're not a Yankee." The children had no answer for an identity based on my Christian identity. The situation melted naturally into one of acceptance. The world doesn't have to be divided into contentious factions if we're all God's children. In Science and Health, Mrs. Setti speaks of how we can attain a higher sense of humanity that is powerful in its meaning and that brings a spiritual sense of what unites mankind. She states, "Clad in the panoply of love, human hatred cannot reach you. The cement of a higher humanity will unite all interests in the one divinity." In Miscellaneous Writings, Mrs. Setti says, "The upright man is guided by a fixed principle, which destines him to do nothing but what is honorable and to abhor whatever is base or unworthy. Hence we find him ever the same, at all times the trusty friend, the affectionate relative, the conscientious man of business, the pious worker, the public-spirited citizen. He assumes no borrowed appearance. He seeks no mask to cover him, for he acts no studied part, but he is indeed what he appears to be, full of truth, candor, and humanity." Having been spit on 3 times, I've always said that the first time is the hardest. You learn a lot in these types of intense challenges. When I was at the United States Army Chaplain School in 1980, a chaplain confronted me when he saw the unusually high level of awards I had on my uniform for someone who was so new to the military. He made a disparaging remark about women being chaplains and insisted I couldn't have possibly deserved the 2 meritorious service medals. Then shockingly, he spit on me. My human reaction was a lot like a gas grill lighting up. I was white hot with anger because it felt so demeaning. I turned all of my attention to God to attempt to understand what had just happened. Instantaneously, self-awareness is what is finding out what's happening in your own thought, and that's critical. I knew if I didn't get myself in hand, I would probably regret what I might do next. That immediate turning away from the human situation brought to my thought Mrs. Setty's counsel in her textbook. You must control evil thoughts in the first instance, or they will control you in the second. I thought of this in a slightly different sense. I knew I must control my thought in the first instant. That's how alert I needed to be in that base situation. I now realize this was a matter of purifying my own heart. It was as if I were getting a stern and poignant counseling session from the Lord. What I heard in my thought was, the soldiers spit on Jesus. That spiritual insight alone floored me, and I felt humbled in the greatest sense. Then the rebuke continued. When you said you wanted to follow me, did you think I meant only in the easy footsteps? No, Lord, I responded. I will follow you all the way to the cross, if that's what's necessary. Instantaneously, any semblance of anger was quenched, and another thought came. What must a person have been through in order to be able to bring himself to spit on another human being? My response absolutely reversed itself. I felt a deep sense of compassion and pity. I reached out and embraced him. I shared with him what I'd heard from our Lord and said, I couldn't imagine what he must have been through in order to be able to bring himself to spit on another human being. It seemed as if he recognized of what he had done in a moment of anger, and it seemed to hit him like a brick in the face. He fell to his knees and wept and begged me to forgive him. I told him I certainly would. Later in my career, someone asked me, who spit on me? The man who spit on me was another student in a very large chaplain officer advanced course, and I hadn't met him before that day in 1980. I had no desire to attach the event to him personally. I wanted to remember who he really was, a child of God. I have ceased to associate the incident with a person, and I see no face in my memory at all. I think that was one of the most important parts of the healing. The Bible account of Daniel, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, assures us the fire doesn't have to have any power over us. Just the reverse is true. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When we face challenges, they shouldn't discourage us because they can deeply bless us. But we must demand our blessing as Jacob did at Peniel, and continue to wrestle with these lessons until we understand them. Trials are a part of the path that guides us, and the book of Hebrews describes it this way. We entertain angels unawares. When people feel embraced in the panoply of love, they truly feel what it means to be a neighbor in the Christian sense of the word. I was very moved by a testimony I heard when a woman shared that she had taken a shortcut through a city park on a very cold day, hoping to shorten the time that she and her child would be in the freezing temperatures. She cut across the park and noticed that a man was lying on a park bench who had a bottle of alcohol and seemed to be drunk. She was admonishing herself for taking the shortcut, thinking she shouldn't have taken the baby through that area. However, unexpectedly, her child then taught her an inspiring precept. Her baby waved at the man on the bench, Everyone is probably moved when they see a baby wave by moving their upper fingers up and down and getting one of those overwhelmingly darling smiles on their face. As her child did this, it so moved the man on the bench that he sat up. His eyes seemed to clear, and then she saw a tear trickle down his cheek. He smiled and he waved back. The baby smiled even bigger. In Christian Science versus pantheism, we find this: whoever demonstrates the highest humanity, long-suffering, self-surrender, and spiritual endeavor to bless others ought to be aided, not hindered, in his holy mission. I would kiss the feet of such a messenger, for to help such a one is to help oneself. The demonstration of Christianity blesses all mankind. Mrs. Eddy obviously realized that sometimes it might even be a baby that teaches us adults to expand our sense of humanity and gives us an example of how a higher sense of humanity embraces all mankind. I was equally inspired by two other examples of what the power of embracing people in a spiritual sense of their identity brings, and that higher sense of humanity can look like different things in our daily activities. A Christian academy was playing a football game against a correctional school team. No one had ever seen the correctional school team play because no one ever came from their school to cheer them or to support them. The principal of the Christian academy entreated the students and spectators on their side of the field, asking if they would split up and would half of them go over to the other side and cheer for that other team. They happily did so. The cheerleaders agreed that half of them would go over too. The cheerleaders even stood out front, so when the correctional school team came out from the locker room and onto the field, the cheerleaders put up their pom-poms and the players went underneath. And you could see how shocked they were by this genuine support from strangers. And it was interesting, for the first time in all the seasons they played, the correctional team made good plays, and they even scored. Although the Christian Academy won by a considerable margin, the correctional team was so moved at the end of the game, they all met in the middle and hugged. The people came out of the stands, the cheerleaders came over, everybody hugged. The young men from the correctional team said that that was the first time in their lives they actually felt cared for and loved. It had made a profound movement in the way that they thought about themselves and who they were. In another example, my niece and two of our neighbors' kids asked me to write a recommendation letter for them when they were applying for college. All three sets of parents cried when they read those letters. My neighbor's son came across into our yard and gave me what I could only describe as a crushing hug, and remarked that no one in his life had ever seen him the way I had in that recommendation letter. From Science and Health, the words of divine science find their immortality in deeds, for their principle heals the sick and spiritualizes humanity. Christian Science nurses express the embracing qualities mentioned in Mrs. Eddy's writings. They're honorable, conscientious, consecrated workers, and trusty friends. They are an inspiration to all the individuals they bring comfort to. They are full of truth as they embrace humanity, and that reflects what they learned in Christian Science nursing classes, and it permeates the healing atmosphere at Sunrise Haven. All of you here today feel that love and support. As Mrs. Eddy clearly defines it in Science and Health, Christian Science is the sovereign panacea, giving strength to the weakness of mortal mind, strength from the immortal and omnipotent mind, and lifting humanity above itself into pure desires, even into spiritual power and goodwill to men. In February 2004, I received a call from a retired chaplain who was a Seventh-day Adventist endorsing agent for their active duty military chaplains. He was informing us that he couldn't speak at a Fort Belvoir National Prayer Breakfast. Doctors had discovered that his wife had a brain tumor and insisted they must operate immediately. They had explained to him that such tumors never reduce in size, and they only get bigger very quickly. Both my Deputy Intelligence Command chaplain and I had known this couple for many years, and we were dearest of friends. We asked him if we could pray for her. He said, of course. And then he added that he would also pray, but that he'd be okay with what the doctor's efforts were, even if it didn't heal her. Then after a quiet moment, the tone changed and he seemed to have thought through what he said. He asked me if he understood correctly that as a Christian Scientist, I would actually be praying for healing. I assured him he understood correctly. I emphasized that it would be a confirmation of the fact that God is that loving and that God is that powerful. He seemed more encouraged and agreed joyously, saying that they would not discount what prayer might accomplish before the scheduled operation. Both my deputy and the Seventh-day Adventist friends were very devout. Anyone who knew them in the chaplaincy would have described them as the real deal. They always prayed every day, and their lives were inspiring examples of the teachings of the Bible. I spent the next 2 evenings praying. At one point, I was acknowledging God's astounding mercy and grandeur. It was a bright moment of absolute conviction. I thought for some time of God as the great I am. I felt a sense of peace in following this line of thought. On the third day, we received an exultant call from the chaplain endorser, alerting us to the fact that doctors took new pictures for surgery and found the tumor was half its original size. Amazed, the doctors recommended not to do anything but to watch and to continue whatever it is you chaplains are doing. We all again made the commitment to pray vigilantly. I spent time praying again about some specific ideas from Science and Health, including where Mrs. Setti points out that God is the life or intelligence which forms and preserves the individuality and identity of humans. I prayed with the important foundation that God is all and the only cause, the only creator of the universe, and that all substance, intelligence, wisdom, being, immortality, cause, and effect belong to God. At the end of 2 weeks, the doctors re-examined his wife. They were astounded to find the tumor completely gone. They stressed they had no medical explanation for what had happened. I know that the prayers of the Seventh-day Adventist couple and my deputy had been sincere, conscientious protests of truth. Each of these individuals were living, loving examples of Christianity and embraced wholeheartedly the commitment we made to do persistent, humble, listening, specific healing prayer for this dear woman we loved. That's been well over 10 years, and there's been no return of any such symptoms. We were truly one in the spirit in our prayers. Here is one more from our leader on the subject of embracing humanity. John saw Jesus as divinity embracing humanity in life and its demonstration, reducing to human perception and understanding the life which is God. In miscellaneous writings, she says, in different ages, the divine idea assumes different forms according to humanity's needs. In this age, it assumes more intelligently than ever before the form of Christian healing. And on another page, sin of any sort tends to hide from an individual the grand verity in science, that the appearing of good in an individual involves the disappearing of evil. He who first brings to humanity some great good must have gained its height beforehand to be able to lift others towards it. One way we can embrace humanity is to share the truth of being and help people understand Christian Science, and that it is the truth of being for all seekers with receptive hearts and minds. While serving in Heidelberg, I made many a drive from the Army Training Center at Grafenwehr, Germany to Heidelberg. My planner chaplain or my deputy corps chaplain would often ride with me. The 4-hour drives would go very quickly when we got involved in deep discussions about our religious beliefs. In 1997, a young Mormon chaplain and I talked extensively about our understanding of God and in great detail about healing prayer. I had many opportunities to share the detail of various experiences of healing. The young man's questions were sincere and showed a genuine desire to understand more about Christian healing. I'd studied the Book of Mormon, and he often helped me understand his tradition better. The next year, I had a planner who was a Methodist minister. He also asked questions at great lengths, showing me that he too was yearning to understand more about healing prayer. We also had numerous opportunities to share while driving to duty stations. The year after I left Europe, the Methodist chaplain returned to a chaplain training conference, limping badly on one foot. He remarked to his friend, the Mormon chaplain who had also been my planner, that this sprain was worse than a previous sprain. The Mormon remarked that it was too bad Chaplain Horton wasn't here, or she could have given you a prayer treatment that would heal the foot. Then the two began to discuss that perhaps they could remember from our talks with me how to apply the healing prayer concepts themselves. One of them remembered that I always prayed while I was running. They both agreed it was not so much about the foot as it was about what had been on the young chaplain's heart as he was running. They recalled Bible passages that supported the need to search your heart and your mind. They agreed he must identify if there had been anything unholy he was entertaining in his thought when running. The chaplain had to admit he'd been a bit prideful and had been congratulating himself that he was a better runner than some of the combat arms planners. They also agreed they needed to affirm that they could trust God to be able and willing to heal those who love him and seek his guidance on such occasions. They agreed to love their neighbor as themselves and keep clearly in thought a pure motive for this activity. They determined that in the future they would also be praying and praising God while running. They agreed. They felt very humbled. By the next day, the chaplain was elated to find that he could walk more freely. He was back running within a very short period of time rather than the number of weeks he originally expected with the severity of the injury. They agreed they wanted to send me an email in the States to let me know about the healing and to get a confirmation that they had correctly learned how to do a prayer treatment. I thanked them and told them they certainly had. Prayer and trust in God's embrace of all humanity brings in the light of truth and love, and then healing follows and blesses all mankind. These are the moments that unite hearts in the one divinity. I've always felt a sense of calm and peace when I read in pulpit and press that all men meet on common ground in the great essentials of love to God and love to man as a signal proof of the divine origin of humanity, which finds no rest until it finds the peace of the Lord in spirituality. That passage I remember linking with this idea in Science and Health. Spiritual rationality and free thought accompany approaching science and cannot be put down. They will emancipate humanity and supplant unscientific means and so-called laws. Both of these passages were foundational when we had issues with weather in Florida. I can't remember a year since I retired here that we haven't had hurricanes. When it was predicted that an eye of a hurricane would come right through Ocala, where we live, I began to pray. One of the thoughts I worked with was that if God created that strong a wind, it would not have a destructive purpose, but a constructive purpose. I affirm that such winds could prune trees that needed it or bring down trees that were decaying. I didn't want to be any part of thinking that God was anything but good, and good was therefore the only basis of reality. Because my brother Rick lived in my parents' old double-wide house trailer, he agreed to come to our brick house because the winds were predicted to be of at least a Category 2 force. After the storm passed through, there was a large number of trees down in the area where we lived. Normally, we'd have been able to get to his place in 10 minutes, but as we attempted to drive him over to see his double-wide, we went and spent half an hour and then an additional hour to find any route, and everything we tried was blocked by downed trees. The winds had brought down a huge number of trees, as was expected. However, what really struck both of us was that in the entire time we drove around all those different routes and roads, we didn't see one tree down on a single house or a car or even a tool shed. It was sometime later when we were finally able to get over to his area. We began to laugh when we saw numerous people getting out of their cars and taking their phone to take a photograph of two mailboxes just a few blocks from Rick's house. They were all amazed how a huge tree had fallen between two mailboxes. But what was strange was it didn't damage either one of them. It was incredible, but there was only about an inch between the fallen tree and the two mailboxes on each side of that tree. So it was clear to me the winds had not even caused damage to a mailbox. It was also inspiring to see how everyone in our cul-de-sac spent the next few weeks helping our neighbors cut up trees that had fallen in our yards. And we were all joining lovingly to rake leaves and debris in each other's yards. The cleanup was accomplished in record time and things were back to normal in a day or so. In so many ways, we have daily opportunities to study the truths of our textbook. I've always turned to a couple of passages to pray when I have to fly. I have had so many opportunities. I think of it as sharing the bread of life as we sit on planes or in airports. This idea in Science and Health has been a real gem in preparing me for those trips. The divinity of the Christ was made manifest in the humanity of Jesus. And similarly, from the people's idea of God, our ideas of divinity form our models of humanity. These truths have brought wonderful opportunities to embrace humanity in many different settings. A few years ago, I was flying over the pond to Europe I had driven the hour and a half to Orlando and had gone through the heavy-duty lines of security and made it to the gate early. Many people were elbow to elbow at that gate. There was a 2-hour weather delay and then an additional maintenance issue. The airline announced that it would take a second 2 hours to get the plane ready to go. I noticed a family sitting in the row of seats right next to me was talking in German. Because I studied German in college and graduate school, I understood they were discussing what a mistake it had been on their part to have already exchanged all their US dollars for German marks, thinking that they would need the marks when they got into the airport in Germany, and that's would be where they would be eating. They were all saying how hungry they were. Most everyone at the gate had headed already to the restaurant area to get lunch. I prayed to see if there was a good idea to help this family. I prayed about wanting to reflect the same quality of humanity as Jesus had in as many times he fed the multitude. I decided I would ask them if it was okay to let me buy them lunch. I shared with them that for 4 years as an Army chaplain, I was stationed in Germany, and I couldn't count the number of times German friends had treated me to amazingly delicious German dinners while I was there. I asked them if they would allow me to express my gratitude for their people's humanity and kindness. I felt they had embodied it in my time in their country. They seemed very moved by me wanting to help them. I had plenty of money and bought the 2 children and the mom and dad their choice of food available. I laughed and told them that probably wasn't anywhere near as good as the German Spätzle and bratwurst I had regularly enjoyed in my parts of the tour in Germany. They allowed me to practice my German on them, so we talked in their language. They seemed very moved that I had learned to speak German and complimented me on my perfect German accent. Blessings were literally flowing every direction. We embraced as we went our separate ways in Paris. We all had tears in our eyes, and it was a lovely memory I will always treasure. On another trip, it came to me to pray that we are all children of God and that we all feel our Father, Mother's love. We're all familiar with this passage from Romans. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are all the children of God. I link that with where Mrs. Setti speaks of the humanity of mankind. With one Father, even God, the whole family of man would be brethren, and the brotherhood of man would consist of love and truth, and have unity of principle and spiritual power, which constitute divine science. I was really focusing on the fact that we are all God's children when I noticed a little girl on the plane leaned out into the aisle and looked back 3 rows to where I was sitting on the other side of the aisle. I was astounded when she began to blow me kisses. I returned the gesture, smiling nearly as big as she had smiled. I had boarded before her and had not even seen her at the gate. She had to have felt that someone was praying for children. She must have felt divine love was embracing her. In her childlike innocence, she sensed who on the plane was part of that prayerful truth and wanted me to know that she had been one of the recipients of the loving thoughts embracing people on that plane. These are just a few of the examples of the times we understand what it means to be brothers and sisters in Christ. It is not at all surprising that humility, loving kindness, and a sense of unity would produce such healing results. In miscellaneous writings, Mrs. Setti points out that love's labors are not lost, and that science voices unselfish love, unfolds infinite good, leads on irresistible forces, and will finally show the fruits of love. Humility and loving kindness can be equally felt by persons of other faith groups that we encounter. There are no limits when love truly embraces humanity, and this is manifest in beautiful ways. The ability to love has to bring hearts together in phenomenal ways, regardless of what human creeds or social rules may claim couldn't possibly happen. On one of our Balkan missions, our United Arab Emirates imams asked for a separate chapel. They wanted a separate place for their officers to worship. Our 3-star general insisted that our United Arab Emirates officers and imams were part of a United States task force, and they would do things our way. He avowed strongly that we had just one chapel where everyone worshiped. They insisted a second time that they needed a separate chapel. I stepped up and asked the United Arab Emirates imams if I could explain their needs to the general. They said, okay. I told the commanding general that Allah could not be worshipped at the same altar as other gods. I explained that we had Buddhist and Wiccans and over 200 different traditions in our area. I quoted the Quran and knew that it was a requirement when saying the Prophet's Muhammad's name to say, peace be upon him. Our general understood and immediately approved a separate portable chapel for them. Afterwards, I was shocked when the United Arab Emirates asked me to shake my hand. This is not permissible behavior for a devout Muslim imam. When I told them that I wouldn't want them to go against their Quran and I wouldn't want them to cross a boundary in their cherished beliefs, they still insisted. I then agreed that they could shake my hand. They came over and they bowed, and it was very devout the way they bowed to me, and they took my hands in their hands, and they reverently said, thank you. I asked them if they would mind explaining to me why it was they were willing to cross the boundary and shake my hand. They all immediately agreed that it was because they had never heard a lifelong Muslim say the Prophet's name and follow with peace be upon him, with the sincerity and reverence I had expressed when I spoke his name. And they had been deeply moved that others were hearing that. These are the times we understand what it means to be brothers and sisters spiritually. It is not at all surprising that humility, loving kindness, and a sense of unity would produce healing results. Christian Science nursing facilities are one of the rare places where people can come for the supreme comforter, for divinity embracing humanity. And Christian scientists are greatly blessed for the work of Christian Science nurses, for the joy, consecration, and generosity with which they minister on a daily basis to those in need. I want to express my profound appreciation, and I hope that it goes out to all of you who support Sunrise Haven. Don't we all feel embraced as humanity when we find we are blessed to be any part of the important mission of Christian Science nursing? Thank you so much for what you all do and for letting me be a part of this meeting today. Goodbye.
We just experienced the physical tour of the Sunrise Haven facility and an inspiring spiritual tour. And none of this would be possible without your time and contributions. As you can see, your contributions are used to support Christian Science healing, and so we appreciate every one of them. If you'd like to take the tours again, Janet's talk in the video will be available on our website. sunrisehaven.org. Sunrise Haven Nursing, inspiring, loving, and healing humanity. We couldn't do this without you. See you next year.